The world dissolves. The noise of everything familiar fades into silence, and then slowly, something ancient stirs. The air is warm, heavy with dust and the faint scent of sun-baked earth. Before us, rising from the flat expanse of the Indus floodplain, stands a city that should not exist. Not here, not this early in human history. And yet here it is. Mohenjo-daro, streets laid in precise grids stretch towards the horizon. Fired bricks, each one shaped to an identical ratio of 1 to 2 to 4, line every wall, every drain, every carefully engineered channel that carries water beneath these ancient boulevards. A great bath, 12 meters long, 7 meters wide, sealed with bitumen against the seepage of time, gleams faintly in the golden light of early morning. This is a city of 40,000 souls, and it hums with a quiet, deliberate order that the world will not see again for centuries. This is the Indus Valley Civilization, and its story is one of the most extraordinary ever told. Long before Greece, long before Rome, long before the great empires that fill our history books, communities of farmers and herders gathered along the rivers of what is now Pakistan, northwest India, and eastern Afghanistan. Around 7,000 years before the Common Era, at a place called Mehrgarh, in the Kachi plain of Balochistan, they built mud brick homes, planted wheat and barley, buried their dead with ornaments of shell and turquoise, and began a journey that would lead, over thousands of years, to one of the largest and most sophisticated civilizations of the ancient world. More than 1,500 settlements, cities with covered drains, private toilets, and public baths, standardized weights carved from chert, a script etched into steatite seals that no one alive today can read, trade routes stretching from the mountains of Badakhshan to the ports of Mesopotamia. And yet, remarkably, no palaces, no monumental temples, no kings carved in stone. A civilization of astonishing achievement, governed in ways we still do not fully understand. From the very first Neolithic villages of Mehrgarh to the rise of fortified towns at Kot Diji, from the urban explosion of the mature Harappan period to the vast trade networks that connected Lothal's tidal dockyard with the merchants of Dilmun and Magan, from the exquisite bronze dancing girl standing barely 10.5 centimeters tall to the mysterious signboard at Dolavira, bearing 10 undeciphered characters, this is the complete story. Every phase, every turning point, every discovery. The peak of power when Akkadian scribes under Sargon of Akkad wrote of ships arriving from a distant land they called Meluha. The slow unraveling, when monsoons shifted, rivers changed course, and the great cities began to empty. The long silence of buried centuries. And then the rediscovery, when Charles Masson first glimpsed the ruins of Harappa in 1826, and when Dayaram Sahni and Rakhal Das Banerjee began to unearth what had been lost for nearly 4,000 years. This is not simply a history lesson. This is a complete journey through time, from the earliest seeds planted in Balochistan soil to the modern laboratories where scholars still struggle to decode a script that guards its secrets with extraordinary patience. What emerges from these stones shaped the world in ways both visible and hidden, from urban planning to water management, from craft traditions still practiced today in Gujarat and Bengal, to religious iconography that may echo across millennia. Some of the greatest mysteries of human achievement lie buried along these riverbanks. By the end of this journey, the full arc of this civilization will be clear, not just what happened, but how an entire world of order, beauty, and ingenuity rose, flourished, and transformed into something new. If these complete journeys through ancient civilizations bring wonder and understanding, a subscription ensures that no chapter of the human story goes unheard. Each week, the full account of a lost world returns to life. Now let us begin. The dust settles, the bricks are warm beneath the morning sun, and the story of the Indus Valley awaits. The wind moves across the Kachi plain of Balochistan, carrying dust from the Bolan Pass toward the broad alluvial fan where the hills surrender to the Indus lowlands. It is approximately 7,000 years before the Common Era. No cities exist anywhere on Earth. No writing, no bronze, no wheel. The world belongs to small bands of hunters and foragers who follow the seasons and the herds. But here, in this crescent of fertile soil watered by seasonal streams flowing from the Bolan River, something unprecedented takes root. Mehrgarh rises not as a single act of foundation, but as a slow accumulation of intention. The earliest structures are modest, small rectangular compartments built from hand-shaped mud bricks, their walls barely the height of a standing person. These are not grand constructions. They are quiet declarations of permanence, the first architecture of settled life in all of South Asia. The mud bricks dry under a relentless sun, hardening into walls that will endure for millennia beneath layers of earth and time. The people who build these walls are among the first in the subcontinent to cultivate wheat and barley. Wild varieties of these grains grow in the surrounding hills, and through patient selection over generations, the inhabitants of Mehrgarh domesticate them into reliable crops. Seed impressions preserved in sun-dried clay reveal the transition, the gradual enlargement of grain, the slow reshaping of wild grass into cultivated food. Alongside the fields, goats and cattle move within enclosures. The domestication of animals proceeds in tandem with agriculture, binding human life to cycles of planting and harvest, birth and slaughter. Death, too, finds its rituals here. The dead are buried in flexed positions within the settlement itself, their knees drawn toward their chests, their bodies oriented with care. Grave goods accompany them: baskets of grain, clusters of shell beads, ornaments of turquoise and lapis lazuli carried from distant mountain sources in Afghanistan. These are not random offerings. They suggest belief in continuity beyond death, a worldview in which the departed require sustenance and beauty in whatever follows. The craft traditions of Mehrgarh develop with remarkable sophistication across the centuries. By roughly 5,500 years before the Common Era, the inhabitants practice a form of proto-dentistry, drilling into living teeth with flint-tipped bow drills. Examination of recovered molars reveals precise cylindrical holes bored into the enamel of teeth that continued to be used after the procedure. This is the earliest known evidence of dental work anywhere in the world, a startling demonstration of technical skill and anatomical knowledge in a community still without metal tools. Pottery appears gradually, first as simple hand-formed vessels, then as increasingly refined wares shaped with deliberate artistry. The earliest ceramics are undecorated and functional: storage jars, cooking vessels, containers for grain. Over time, surface treatments grow more elaborate, with burnished finishes and the first tentative painted designs. Basket-impressed bases reveal the method of construction: clay pressed into woven forms, the imprint of reeds preserved in fired earth. The settlement expands across its alluvial terrace, layer building upon layer. Storage compartments multiply, suggesting growing surplus and the organizational demands that surplus creates. There is no evidence of fortification, no sign of violent destruction in these earliest levels. Life at Mehrgarh unfolds in the patient rhythm of agricultural seasons, each generation inheriting the accumulated knowledge of its predecessors and adding its own refinements. This is the seedbed. From this quiet beginning on the edge of the Bolan Pass, a tradition of settled life, craft innovation, and long-distance exchange will spread across the river systems of the Indus and its tributaries. The mud-brick walls of Mehrgarh hold within them the first whisper of a civilization that will one day stretch from the Arabian Sea to the foothills of the Himalayas. But that future remains hidden, buried in millennia yet to unfold. For now there is only the plain, the river, the grain ripening under an ancient sun, and the steady hands shaping mud into walls that refuse to be forgotten. The knowledge seeded at Mehrgarh does not remain confined to the Kachi plain. Over centuries, the techniques of cultivation, animal husbandry, and mud-brick construction migrate outward, carried by communities following the courses of rivers toward richer floodplains. By 5,500 years before the Common Era, a quiet transformation is underway across a vast stretch of territory, from the highlands of Balochistan down through the Indus corridor and eastward along the now flowing channels of the Ghaggar-Hakra river system. Farming villages multiply, each one a small experiment in settled life, each one connected to its neighbors by threads of exchange and shared tradition. In the upland valleys of Balochistan, the Togau phase emerges. Small communities produce a distinctive painted pottery, decorated with geometric friezes of black pigment on buff clay, rows of humped bulls, zigzag lines evoking water or mountains, and repeated triangular patterns suggesting textile designs transferred onto ceramic surfaces. These are not merely functional vessels. They carry symbolic meaning, marking identity and belonging across scattered settlements separated by rugged terrain. Slightly later, the Kichi Beg phase introduces new refinements. Pottery becomes more varied in form and decoration, with polychrome designs appearing alongside monochrome. Vessels are shaped with greater precision, their walls thinner, their firing more controlled. Mud-brick architecture grows more complex, with multi-room structures replacing simpler shelters. Storage facilities expand, reflecting agricultural surpluses that free portions of the population for specialized craft work. Far to the east, along the dried paleo-channels of the Ghaggar-Hakra system in what is now the Cholistan Desert of southern Punjab, a parallel development unfolds. Surveys conducted in the 20th century reveal over 100 sites bearing a distinctive ceramic tradition known as Hakra ware, a sturdy, mud-tempered pottery with simple incised or painted decoration. These settlements cluster along ancient riverbanks, their inhabitants cultivating the fertile alluvial soils deposited by seasonal flooding. The Ghaggar-Hakra system, fed by Himalayan tributaries, sustains a ribbon of green through otherwise arid terrain, and communities thrive along its length. Copper appears. Small artifacts, simple pins, flat blades, rings, begin turning up in settlement layers dating to this period. The ore likely comes from sources in Balochistan and Rajasthan, evidence that exchange networks now span hundreds of kilometers. Marine shells from the Arabian Sea coast particularly Turbinella pyrum, travel inland to highland villages where they are cut and shaped into bangles and ornaments. Lapis lazuli from the distant mines of Badakhshan in northeastern Afghanistan surfaces occasionally, a deep blue stone carried across mountain passes by intermediaries whose roots will endure for millennia. The painted pottery traditions of these centuries reveal something profound about social organization. Across widely separated regions, certain motifs recur: the pipal leaf, the humped zebu, intersecting circles, fish-scale patterns. This shared visual vocabulary suggests not political unity, but cultural interconnection, a web of relationships maintained through trade, intermarriage, and seasonal gatherings. Potters in the Indus lowlands and potters in the Balochistan highlands draw from a common symbolic reservoir, even as their specific techniques diverge. Village layouts grow more deliberate. Houses align along pathways that will eventually become streets. Communal spaces appear, open areas where grain is processed, where kilns fire pottery in controlled atmospheres, reaching temperatures sufficient to vitrify clay surfaces. The population of individual settlements remains modest, perhaps a few hundred souls, but the total number of occupied sites increases steadily. The landscape fills with human presence. The rivers govern everything. Their annual floods deposit fresh silt, renewing agricultural land without the need for elaborate irrigation. Their channels provide routes for the movement of goods and people. Their banks offer clay for bricks and pottery, reeds for roofing, and water for every necessity of life. Communities that understand the rhythms of these rivers prosper. Those that misjudge their power are swept away, their remains buried beneath meters of alluvial sediment. By 3,500 years before the Common Era, the foundations are laid. Hundreds of farming villages dot the river systems of the greater Indus region. Copper metallurgy, long-distance trade, painted pottery traditions, and increasingly organized settlement patterns all point toward a society on the threshold of something larger. The scattered seeds of Mehrgar have taken root across an enormous territory, and the slow convergence of these traditions is already underway. Something changes along the Indus and its tributaries in the centuries after 3,500 before the Common Era. The villages that have grown steadily for generations begin to transform in character. Walls rise, not the low mud brick partitions that divide one household from another, but massive fortifications, thick, deliberate, engineered to endure. Stone foundations support courses of sun-dried brick that climb to heights no earlier settlement in the region has attempted. These walls announce a new reality. Communities are consolidating, organizing, and protecting something worth defending. Kot Diji stands on a prominent ridge overlooking the Indus floodplain in what is now northern Sindh. Its citadel occupies the highest ground, encircled by a formidable wall of limestone rubble and mud brick that rises in a steep batter, angled to resist both assault and erosion. Below this elevated enclosure, a lower settlement spreads outward, housing a larger population engaged in agriculture, craft production, and trade. The distinction between citadel and lower town, between elevated authority and broader habitation, marks a conceptual leap in how communities organize themselves. This is not simply a village grown large. It is a settlement with internal hierarchy expressed in stone and earth. The pottery of the Kot Diji phase carries its own signature. Burnished vessels in red and buff fabrics bear painted motifs of striking consistency. fish-scale patterns, intersecting circles, pipal leaves, and a recurring horned figure that appears across sites separated by hundreds of kilometers. This standardization of decorative vocabulary suggests shared cultural identity, perhaps reinforced through exchange networks and seasonal gatherings. Kilns operate at controlled temperatures, producing wares of reliable quality that circulate widely. Far to the northwest, on the Gomal Plain in what is now Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, the settlement of Rehmanderi reveals something remarkable. Its layout follows a deliberate grid, with streets intersecting at approximate right angles and residential blocks arranged in orderly rows. This is not organic growth, shaped by generations of incremental building. Someone planned this settlement before its first walls went up. Rehmanderi's grid anticipates the famous urban planning of the mature Harappan cities by several centuries, demonstrating that the impulse towards spatial order runs deep in this cultural tradition. At Amre, south of Mohenjo-daro, along the western bank of the Indus, excavations reveal stratified layers that document the gradual transition from earlier regional traditions into the Kot-Diji horizon. Each layer of occupation tells a story of continuity and change, new pottery forms appearing alongside older ones, building techniques evolving, trade goods arriving from increasingly distant sources. Lapis lazuli from the mountains of Badakhshan, marine shells from the Arabian Sea coast, and copper from multiple sources all pass through these growing settlements. The fortification walls speak of both cooperation and tension. Constructing such defenses requires coordinated labor, surplus food to sustain workers, and leadership capable of directing collective effort. Yet the walls also imply threat from rival communities, from pastoral groups, or from the unpredictable violence of the rivers themselves. Whatever the danger, the response is architectural and communal. Then, around 2800 before the Common Era, Kot-Diji burns. A thick destruction layer of ash and charred debris separates the earlier occupation from what follows. Whether this conflagration results from conflict, accident, or deliberate transformation remains uncertain, but the settlement that emerges above the burn layer belongs to a different world. The pottery changes. The building standards shift. The cultural markers of what archaeologists call the mature Harappan phase begin to appear, standardized bricks in the precise ratio of 1 to 2 to 4, new seal forms, and a uniformity of material culture that will soon stretch across an area larger than ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia combined. The age of fortified towns is giving way to something unprecedented. The first true cities of South Asia are about to emerge. The transformation unfolds with a speed that has few parallels in the ancient world. In the span of roughly 2 centuries after 2800 before the Common Era, scattered communities across the Indus Basin and the Ghaggar-Hakra watershed begin to converge upon a shared material vocabulary so precise, so uniform, that it can only reflect a profound reorganization of social life. The fired brick becomes the signature of this convergence. Kilns across hundreds of kilometers now produce bricks in an identical ratio of 1 to 2 to 4, thickness to width to length, a standardization so exacting that a brick made near the banks of the Ravi fits seamlessly into a wall rising along the lower Indus in Sindh. This is not coincidence. This is consensus on a civilizational scale. At Kalibangan, on the dried banks of the ancient Ghaggar-Hakra in northern Rajasthan, the earth preserves a record unlike any other. Beneath the mature Harappan settlement lies a ploughed field dating to this transitional era, the oldest known ploughed field anywhere on the planet. The furrows run in two directions, crossing each other at right angles, suggesting the simultaneous cultivation of two different crops in a single season. The clay has held these marks for nearly 5,000 years, a fossilized testament to agricultural planning that speaks of surplus, intention, and the capacity to feed growing populations. Kalibangan's early settlement already shows a divided layout, a higher western mound and a lower eastern area, foreshadowing the citadel and lower town arrangement that will define the great mature Harappan cities. Mud brick fortification walls enclose the western mound. Pottery from this phase carries painted motifs and, crucially, some of the earliest known examples of the Indus script. Short sequences of signs incised or painted onto vessel surfaces before firing. The script appears not as a sudden invention, but as an emergent system, its signs gradually stabilizing across sites separated by vast distances. Further south, at Banawali in present-day Haryana, a settlement takes shape that bridges the gap between village and city. Its layout reveals semi-urban planning, streets oriented along cardinal directions, houses built with standardized bricks, and a defensive wall encircling the habitation. Banawali is not yet a metropolis, but it is no longer a village. It occupies the threshold between two modes of existence, its architecture straining toward an order that has not yet fully crystallized. Across the broader region, the signs of integration multiply. Steatite seals begin to appear with increasing frequency, their surfaces carved with animal motifs and clusters of script characters. These small square objects, rarely larger than a few centimeters on each side, will become the most iconic artifacts of the civilization. In this transitional phase, they emerge as tools of economic coordination, pressed into wet clay to mark ownership, authenticate goods, or authorize exchanges. The unicorn-like bull, the humped zebu, the elephant, and the rhinoceros take form under the seal cutter's blade, each image rendered with a naturalism that reveals close observation of the living animal. The standardization extends beyond bricks and seals. Pottery forms narrow toward a shared repertoire. Certain vessel shapes and surface treatments become common from the Makran coast to the upper Punjab. Cubical chert weights, polished to geometric precision, begin to appear at multiple sites, their masses conforming to a system that will soon govern trade across more than 1 million square kilometers. What drives this convergence remains one of the deepest questions in South Asian archaeology. No conquering army leaves its trace. No royal inscription declares dominion. The uniformity appears to arise not from coercion, but from cooperation, networks of trade, kinship, and shared belief weaving communities into a fabric of mutual intelligibility. The threshold is not crossed by force, but by collective agreement, a silent revolution recorded only in the geometry of bricks, the grammar of signs, and the careful furrows of a ploughed field preserved beneath the dust of Rajasthan. By 2600 before the Common Era, the threshold has been crossed entirely, and the first great cities of the Indus begin to rise. The cities rise from the alluvial plain of Sindh as though summoned by the logic of the land itself. Among them, one settlement surpasses all others in ambition and scale. On a series of elevated mounds beside the Indus River, roughly 150 kilometers north of where the river will one day empty into the Arabian Sea, The city known to modern archaeology as Mohenjo-daro takes shape in the centuries after 2600 before the Common Era. Its name, assigned millennia later, means Mound of the Dead in Sindhi, but in its first decades it is anything but lifeless. It is a city of perhaps 40,000 souls, one of the largest urban centers on Earth in its time, and every element of its construction speaks of deliberate, collective intelligence. The city divides into two principal zones. To the west, a citadel mound rises some 12 meters above the floodplain, built upon massive platforms of mud brick and fired brick, its edges fortified with battered walls. This elevated precinct houses structures of communal significance, including a vast granary complex with ventilated floors designed to protect stored grain from moisture and vermin. To the east stretches the lower city, a dense residential and commercial quarter laid out on a precise grid of streets oriented roughly north-south and east-west. The main boulevards run as wide as 10 meters, intersected by narrower lanes that create orderly blocks of housing. Fired bricks in the familiar ratio of 1 to 2 to 4 lock together with a precision that speaks of centralized planning and shared standards enforced across the entire settlement. But the most extraordinary structure occupies the citadel's heart. A rectangular basin measuring 12 meters in length, 7 meters in width, and 2.5 meters in depth, sits within a courtyard of finely fitted brickwork. Its floor and walls are sealed with a thick layer of natural bitumen, rendered completely watertight. A series of rooms flanks the basin on its eastern and western sides, each containing what appear to be private bathing chambers. A large well nearby supplies fresh water, while a corbelled drain carries used water away from the structure and out through the citadel wall. This is the Great Bath, and nothing like it exists anywhere else in the Bronze Age world. Its purpose remains debated, but the architectural investment suggests ritual significance rather than mere hygiene. The careful waterproofing, the surrounding chambers, the prominent placement atop the citadel mound, all point toward ceremonial purification, a practice that will echo through South Asian religious tradition for millennia to come. Below the citadel, the lower city hums with infrastructure that rivals settlements built thousands of years later. Nearly every house connects to a citywide drainage system. Wastewater flows from bathing platforms and latrines through clay pipes into brick-lined channels running beneath the streets. At regular intervals, inspection points allow maintenance of the system. Over 700 wells have been identified across the site, many built within private homes, their cylindrical brick shafts sinking deep into the earth to reach the water table. Indoor bathing platforms, carefully sloped to direct water into drains, appear in houses of varying sizes, suggesting that access to sanitation is not a privilege of the elite, but a standard of urban life. The streets themselves are remarkably clean by ancient standards. Brick bins at intersections collect refuse. The orientation of the grid channels prevailing winds through the city, providing ventilation in the brutal Sindhi heat. Houses turn blank walls to the street, opening inward to private courtyards that admit light and air while maintaining domestic privacy. Some structures rise to 2 stories, their upper floors supported by timber beams now long vanished, leaving only the socket holes in brickwork as evidence. No palace dominates the skyline, no monumental temple anchors the citadel. The largest and most carefully constructed building is the Great Bath itself, a space of water, not of thrones. Whatever authority governs Mohenjo-daro expresses itself not through the glorification of individual power, but through the maintenance of collective order. The drains, the wells, the standardized bricks, the grid of streets. These are the monuments of a civilization that measures greatness in the quiet infrastructure of daily life. And in the early decades of the 25th century before the Common Era, this city stands as the most sophisticated urban experiment the world has yet produced. 570 kilometers to the northeast, along the shifting banks of the Ravi River in Punjab, another great city breathes with the same disciplined rhythm. Harappa rises from the fertile floodplain not as a colony or satellite of Mohenjo-daro, but as its equal, a parallel expression of the same civilizational logic, built from the same standardized bricks, governed by the same invisible principles of order, yet possessing its own distinct character, shaped by the land and waters that sustain it. The city sprawls across 6 distinct mound areas, each serving interlocking functions that together compose an urban organism of remarkable complexity. Mound AB, the citadel, commands the western edge with massive mud-brick ramparts rising above the plain. These walls, tapering as they climb, enclose administrative and possibly ceremonial spaces whose exact purposes remain elusive. The fortifications are not merely defensive. They channel movement, regulate access, and project the authority of a system that builds its power into the geometry of the earth itself. South of the citadel, along Mound F, rows of granaries stand in disciplined formation, small rectangular structures arranged in parallel lines, their floors ventilated by air channels designed to prevent moisture from spoiling stored grain. Nearby, circular working platforms of fired brick, each roughly 3 meters in diameter, bear the traces of intensive labor. Wheat husks and barley fragments embedded in the surrounding soil suggest grain processing on an organized scale, the agricultural surplus of the Punjab hinterland flowing into the city and being transformed into the currency of collective sustenance. The lower residential areas extend across Mound E and beyond, dense with houses built on the familiar courtyard plan. Wells punctuate the neighborhoods. Drains run beneath lanes paved with compacted earth and broken pottery. Terracotta carts with solid wheels, miniature replicas of the ox-drawn vehicles that traverse the trade routes connecting Harappa to distant resource zones, appear among household debris, suggesting both the importance of overland transport and the playful imagination of the city's craftspeople. Death, too, follows its own careful order. Cemetery R37, excavated from the southern margins of the settlement, contains extended burials oriented on a north-south axis. The dead lie with pottery vessels, shell ornaments, copper mirrors, and personal adornments of jasper and agate. Some graves hold dozens of ceramic vessels, their forms consistent with the standardized repertoire found across the civilization. These are not royal tombs laden with gold. They are the resting places of a society that honors its dead with the same measured care it applies to its drains and its brickwork, neither ostentatious nor neglectful, but precisely calibrated. What distinguishes Harappa from Mohenjo-daro is not a difference in sophistication, but in emphasis. The Ravi River city sits at a crossroads of overland routes, linking the mineral-rich hills of Balochistan and the lapis lazuli sources of distant Badakhshan to the agricultural heartlands of the Punjab and the Gagar Hakra basin. Its working platforms and granary rows suggest a city deeply engaged in the processing and redistribution of agricultural wealth, a node in a network that transforms raw harvests into stored power. Yet the same mysteries persist. No throne room has been identified. No royal seal proclaims a dynasty. The authority that coordinates the labor of thousands, that enforces brick dimensions across 500,000 square kilometers, that maintains drainage systems requiring constant civic attention, leaves no portrait of itself. It is an authority written in infrastructure, legible only in the uniformity of weights, the precision of walls, and the quiet discipline of a city that functions as a single organism. By 2450 years before the Common Era, Harappa and Mohenjo-daro stand as twin anchors of a civilization whose reach extends from the Arabian Sea to the foothills of the Hindu Kush, and whose ambitions are expressed not in conquest, but in the relentless perfection of ordered life. Far to the southeast, where the civilization's reach extends into the sun-scorched margins of Gujarat, a city rises that defies every expectation of what a settlement in such terrain should be. Kadir Island sits within the vast white salt flats of the Rann of Kutch, a landscape of blinding seasonal marshes that flood during monsoon and bake to crystalline hardness under the dry season sun. Here, around 2,500 years before the Common Era, Harappan builders choose to establish not a modest outpost, but a monumental urban center. Dholavira, a city of white stone and engineered water, a fortress against aridity itself. The site commands a low rocky plateau, and its architects exploit the local geology in ways unique among Harappan settlements. Where Mohenjo-daro and Harappa build almost exclusively in fired and mud brick, Dholavira's builders quarry limestone and sandstone from the island's own ridges, raising walls of pale-dressed stone that gleam against the tawny earth. The city unfolds in a tripartite plan of striking deliberation. A heavily fortified citadel occupies the highest ground, its walls thick and imposing. Adjacent to it lies a middle town, also walled, reserved for functions that may include ceremonial and administrative purposes. Beyond these inner precincts stretches the lower town, the largest enclosure, where the broader population lives and works within its own defensive perimeter. The entire complex spans nearly 100 hectares. But the true genius of Dholavira lies beneath and between its walls. 16 reservoirs carved from rock and lined with stone form an interconnected water management system of extraordinary sophistication. 2 seasonal streams, the Mansa to the north and the Manha to the south, carry brief but intense monsoon runoff across the island. Dholavira's engineers channel these ephemeral waters through a cascading network of dams, channels, and storage tanks, capturing every possible drop and holding it against the long months of drought. Some reservoirs are enormous, cut deep into bedrock, their walls reinforced with masonry. The system represents one of the earliest and most elaborate examples of water harvesting in the ancient world, sustaining a population of perhaps 15,000 in a landscape that offers almost no perennial water source. Within the citadel, a large open ceremonial ground suggests public gatherings of a kind not seen at other Harappan sites. And at the northern gate of the citadel, excavations reveal one of the civilization's most tantalizing artifacts, a signboard bearing 10 large characters of the Indus script, each approximately 37 centimeters tall, originally inlaid into a wooden plank. It is the largest known inscription of the Harappan world, positioned where it would be visible to all who approached the seat of authority. What it proclaims remains unknown. The script guards its meaning as fiercely as the desert guards its water. Dholavira endures for roughly 4 centuries in its full urban form, its stone walls weathering the cycles of flood and drought. The city undergoes at least 7 stages of occupation, including periods of decline and rebuilding, suggesting resilience in the face of environmental stress. Its unique stone architecture, its monumental water infrastructure, and its position at the civilization's southern frontier mark it as a place of strategic and perhaps symbolic importance, a declaration that Harappan order can be imposed even upon the most inhospitable ground. In 2021 of the Common Era, the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization inscribes Dholavira as a World Heritage Site, recognizing what the salt flats had preserved for millennia, the remains of a city that turned scarcity into abundance through nothing more than precision, planning, and stone. Along the eastern edge of the civilization's reach, where the coastal plain of Gujarat meets the Gulf of Khambhat, a settlement takes shape around 2450 before the Common Era that reveals something no other Harappan city so clearly demonstrates: a mastery of the sea. Lothal sits not on the Indus itself, but on the Bhogava River, a tributary of the Sabarmati, positioned where tidal waters once pushed inland with enough force and regularity to carry vessels from the open ocean deep into the floodplain. The city is modest in scale compared to Mohenjo-daro or Harappa, covering perhaps 22 hectares, yet its function within the civilization's network is disproportionate to its size. Lothal is a gateway, a point of exchange between the Harappan heartland and the maritime world beyond. The most extraordinary feature lies at the city's eastern flank, a massive rectangular basin measuring approximately 37 meters long and 22 meters wide, constructed of fired brick, with walls standing 3.5 meters high. An inlet channel connects this basin to an ancient course of the river, and a sluice gate controls the flow of tidal water. When the archaeologist Shikaripura Ranganatha Rao begins excavating Lothal in 1955, he identifies this structure as a tidal dockyard, the earliest known in the world. The engineering is precise. The basin is oriented to capture the tidal bore that once surged up the Gulf of Khambhat, allowing vessels to enter at high tide and remain afloat within the enclosed dock as waters receded. Spillway channels prevent overflow during monsoon floods. The brickwork is tight, the joints sealed, the entire structure a testament to hydrological calculation applied at architectural scale. Adjacent to the dockyard stands a warehouse, a large brick structure with raised platforms and evidence of packing materials. Clay ceilings recovered from its floors bear impressions of Harappan seals, the administrative fingerprints of goods received, inspected, and dispatched. Some ceilings show cord marks on their reverse, evidence that they once secured bales or containers. The warehouse connects Lothal to the broader Harappan system of standardized trade, but its proximity to the dock points specifically outward, toward Dilmun in the Persian Gulf, toward Magan on the Omani coast, toward the distant keys of Mesopotamian cities where Harappan goods arrive as exotic luxuries. Lothal's workshops reveal the commodities that flow through this gateway. Bead-making ateliers cluster in the lower town, where craftspeople drill long cylindrical beads from carnelian, using slender earnestite-tipped drills, a technique demanding hours of patient rotation for a single bead. Microbeads of steatite and gold are produced alongside ornaments of shell and ivory. Copper and bronze tools appear in quantity, some cast locally, others arriving from the Harappan interior. A terracotta model of a ship, complete with a mast socket and flat bottom, suited to shallow coastal waters, offers a glimpse of the vessels that once lined the dockyard basin. The city itself follows Harappan principles. A raised acropolis to the southwest houses what appear to be elite or administrative structures, while the lower town spreads on a grid with brick-lined drains and private bathing platforms. A bead furnace discovered in the industrial quarter still contains unfinished beads, frozen in mid-production by whatever event ended the workshop's operation. Fire altars similar to those at Kalibangan suggest shared ritual practices extending across the civilization's vast geography. Lothal endures for roughly 2.5 centuries, its occupation spanning from about 2450 to 2200 before the Common Era. During this period, it serves as the civilization's primary conduit to the sea, channeling raw materials inward and finished goods outward along routes that stretch thousands of kilometers. The evidence of this exchange, Harappan seals at Mesopotamian sites, Gulf-type circular seals at Lothal, etched carnelian beads in Sumerian royal tombs, traces a web of commerce that makes the Harappan world not an isolated phenomenon, but a participant in the first great age of international trade. The dockyard basin, silted and dry for 4,000 years, remains the oldest known structure built to receive ocean-going vessels, a monument to the moment a river civilization turned its gaze toward the horizon and built the infrastructure to reach it. The reach of that gaze extends farther than any single port can contain. By 2400 before the Common Era, the Harappan trade network has become one of the most expansive commercial systems in the ancient world, linking the Indus floodplains to mountain passes in Afghanistan, to island entrepôts in the Persian Gulf, and to the temple economies of southern Mesopotamia. The scale of this exchange is not speculative. It is recorded in clay, in cuneiform tablets, in seal impressions, in the physical residue of goods that traveled thousands of kilometers to reach their final resting places. The overland route runs northwest through the passes of Balochistan and into the highlands of Afghanistan. At Shotugai, on the banks of the Amu Darya in Badakhshan province, a small Harappan outpost operates deep within Lapis Lazuli territory. The settlement bears unmistakable markers of Indus culture, Harappan pottery, standardized weights, even Indus-style seals, more than 800 kilometers from the nearest major Harappan city. Its purpose is singular: to secure access to the deep blue lapis lazuli, mined from the mountains nearby, a stone prized across the Bronze Age world, from the workshops of Mohenjo-daro to the royal tombs of Ur. The maritime routes are equally ambitious. Ships depart from ports along the Makran coast and Gujarat, sailing westward across the Arabian Sea to Dilmun, identified with modern Bahrain, a critical intermediary in Gulf commerce. Round Gulf-type seals recovered at Bahrain and Failaka Island bear witness to this exchange, their circular form distinct from the square steatite seals of the Indus cities. From Dilmun, goods move onward to Magan, corresponding to the Oman Peninsula, a source of copper, and ultimately to the cities of Sumer and Akkad. The Akkadian evidence is direct. Cuneiform inscriptions from the reign of Sargon of Akkad, who rules from approximately 2334 to 2279 before the Common Era, boast that ships from Meluhha, Magan, and Dilmun dock at the quays of his capital, Agade. Meluhha is the Mesopotamian name for the Indus civilization, and the references are not casual. Later texts from the Ur-III period describe Meluhhan translators living in Mesopotamia, Meluhhan villages near Lagash, and specific commodities, carnelian, ivory, timber, and exotic birds, arriving from this distant eastern land. The material proof surfaces in excavation after excavation. A square Harappan seal bearing the image of a unicorn bull and Indus script characters appears at Ur, among the most powerful cities of Sumer. Etched carnelian beads, produced through a technique unique to Harappan craftspeople involving alkali treatment to create white patterns on red stone, turn up in Mesopotamian royal burials and elite contexts. These beads cannot be imitated. Their presence in Sumer is unambiguous evidence of direct or relayed Harappan export. The system operates without coinage, without any known written contracts in the Indus script that scholars can yet read. Instead, standardized cubical chert weights regulate transactions. The same weight system found at Mohenjo-daro and Harappa appears at Lothal, at Shortugai, at sites across the entire civilization. The most common unit, 13.63 grams, serves as the anchor of a binary progression, 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, that allows precise measurement across vast distances and between cultures with different languages. What moves along these routes is not merely raw material. Finished luxury goods, long barrel-shaped carnelian beads drilled with extraordinary precision, shell bangles cut from massive turbinella pyrum conchs, stoneware bangles fired at temperatures exceeding 1100 degrees, flow outward as markers of Harappan technological mastery. In return, tin, silver, and possibly textiles move eastward, though the perishable nature of many goods leaves their traces faint. The network peaks between 2300 and 2100 before the Common Era, a period when the Indus civilization and Mesopotamia exist as the two great poles of Bronze Age commerce, connected by a chain of intermediaries, sailors, and overland caravans. The merchants of Meluhha leave no names, no personal archives, no portraits. They leave instead the goods themselves, scattered across 4,000 kilometers of ancient world, silent testimony to an economy of remarkable reach operating from cities that governed themselves by consensus, measured their world with stone cubes, and sent their ships toward every horizon the sea would allow. Among all the artifacts these cities produced, none haunts the modern world more persistently than the small carved objects that bear an arrangement of symbols no living person can read. The Indus script appears across the full span of the mature Harappan period, from roughly 2600 to 1900 before the Common Era, inscribed on more than 4,000 objects recovered from sites spanning the entire civilization. It is the voice of a people frozen mid-sentence, preserved in stone and copper and clay, yet speaking a language that remains locked behind a door for which no key has been found. The most common carriers of the script are steatite seals, small square objects rarely exceeding 3 or 4 centimeters on a side. Each seal is carved in intaglio, its surface incised so that when pressed into wet clay, it produces a raised impression. Nearly every seal pairs its inscription with an animal figure rendered in extraordinary naturalistic detail. The unicorn bull dominates, appearing on roughly 60% of all seals, its muscular body shown in profile with a single horn and a mysterious object before its chest that scholars have variously identified as a ritual stand or feeding trough. Other seals depict elephants, rhinoceroses, water buffalo, short-horned bulls, and tigers, each carved with an anatomical precision that suggests intimate familiarity with the living animal. The script itself comprises approximately 400 to 600 distinct signs, depending on how scholars classify variants and ligatures. This number places it somewhere between a purely logographic system and one incorporating phonetic elements, though no consensus exists. The average inscription runs to just 5 characters. The longest known example, found on a surface from Dolavira, contains 26 characters. The most frequently occurring single sign appears on more than 1,300 objects, suggesting it carries a common grammatical or semantic function, perhaps a title, a name element, or a word of broad application. Beyond seals, the script surfaces on small copper tablets, some bearing inscriptions on both sides, on miniature terracotta tablets apparently mass-produced from molds, and as graffiti scratched into pottery before or after firing. At Dolavira, a remarkable signboard once displayed 10 large characters, fashioned from what may have been inlaid white material, set into a wooden frame, mounted above the north gate of the citadel. The characters measured roughly 37 centimeters each, the largest known examples of the script, clearly intended to be read from a distance. Attempts at decipherment stretch back to the 1920s, when G.R. Hunter first catalogued the signs. In the 1960s and 70s, Soviet scholars proposed a Dravidian reading, while Asko Parpola of Finland built the most sustained case for a Proto-Dravidian language underlying the script, identifying possible fish signs as phonetic values. S.R. Rao proposed an alphabetic reading linked to later Brahmi. Iravatham Mahadevan compiled a comprehensive concordance of signs. Yet none of these efforts has achieved the scholarly consensus that would constitute true decipherment. The inscriptions remain too short, the absence of a bilingual text too crippling, the number of competing hypotheses too great. What the script reveals even without decipherment is the depth of administrative and symbolic coordination across the civilization. Identical sign sequences appear at sites separated by over 1,000 kilometers. The consistency of seal formats, the standardization of sign forms, and the sheer volume of inscribed objects all point to a shared system of meaning maintained across generations and vast distances. Whether the signs record names, titles, clan affiliations, economic transactions, or ritual formulas, they represent a technology of communication that bound the civilization together as surely as its bricks and weights. The script waits in museum cases and excavation storerooms, 4,000 fragments of a conversation that once governed cities, sealed warehouses, and marked identity. Its meaning suspended just beyond the reach of every scholar who has ever held a seal to the light and traced its silent characters. Beyond the seals and their silent script, beyond the trade routes and the monumental baths, the true genius of Harappan civilization reveals itself in the most intimate of spaces, the ordinary home. The cities that flourish between 2600 and 1900 before the Common Era are not merely impressive from above, with their grid-aligned streets and citadel mounds. They are revolutionary at the level of the individual household, where fired brick walls enclose a quality of daily life unmatched anywhere on Earth for centuries to come. The residential blocks of Mohenjo-daro follow a consistent logic. Major streets run roughly north to south and east to west, creating rectangular blocks subdivided by narrow lanes. Houses turn blank brick walls to the street, their entrances opening instead onto side lanes, ensuring privacy from the main thoroughfares. Doorways lead into central courtyards open to the sky, the organizing heart of domestic life. Rooms averaging 4 by 4 meters cluster around these courtyards, their walls built from fired bricks maintaining the civilization-wide ratio of 1 to 2 to 4, thickness to width to length. Some structures rise to 2 stories, evidenced by thick ground floor walls and remnants of brick staircases. Upper rooms likely serve as sleeping quarters, while ground floor spaces accommodate cooking, storage, and craft work. Water defines these homes as much as brick. Mohenjo-daro alone contains over 700 wells, cylindrical shafts lined with wedge-shaped bricks tapering inward to form stable columns sunk deep into the earth. Nearly every third house possesses its own well, an astonishing density of private water access. Bathing platforms of tightly fitted brick, often slightly raised and sloped toward a corner drain, occupy dedicated rooms. Wastewater flows through terracotta pipes set into walls, descending to covered drains that run beneath the lanes outside. These drains represent perhaps the most remarkable infrastructure achievement of the Bronze Age world. Constructed from brick and lined with mortar, they channel household wastewater and sewage along the narrow lanes, connecting individual homes to larger drains beneath the main streets. Corbelled stone slabs or brick covers seal them from above, and at regular intervals, rectangular inspection manholes allow access for maintenance and clearing of sediment. Some homes contain what can only be described as seated latrines, brick platforms with chutes leading directly to the street drains or to brick-lined soak pits. The integration of private sanitation with public drainage infrastructure operates as a unified system, planned and maintained at a civic scale. The consistency of this planning across the city is striking. House sizes vary, suggesting differences in wealth or status, yet even modest dwellings connect to the drainage network. Larger residences feature multiple courtyards, dedicated wells, and more elaborate bathing facilities, but the fundamental amenities, drainage, water access, waste removal, extend broadly through the urban population. This pattern repeats not only at Mohenjo-daro but at Harappa, Kalibangan, and Lothal, where similar drainage systems and domestic layouts appear adapted to local conditions. The streets themselves are maintained surfaces, compacted earth sometimes reinforced with broken pottery sherds. Brick-lined rubbish bins stand at intervals along lanes, indicating organized waste collection. The absence of encroachment onto main streets across multiple building phases suggests ongoing civic regulation of public space, a discipline maintained over generations without any visible apparatus of royal enforcement. Within these ordered homes, daily life leaves its traces in grinding stones for grain, terracotta cooking vessels blackened by fire, storage jars sunk into floors, and the bones of cattle, sheep, goat, and fish. Courtyards catch sunlight and channel breezes through the dense urban fabric. The rhythm of water drawn from wells, poured over bathing platforms and carried away through drains beneath the streets constitutes a cycle of domestic hygiene so thoroughly engineered into the city's bones that it functions as naturally as breathing. No civilization would match this integration of private comfort and public sanitation infrastructure until the Roman Empire, more than 2,000 years later. The same hands that laid those drains and fitted those bricks with such precision also mastered fire itself, bending raw stone and metal and shell into objects of astonishing beauty and technical sophistication. Across the Harappan world, from roughly 2500 to 1900 before the Common Era, craft production reaches a level of complexity that rivals anything in the contemporary Bronze Age, and in certain techniques surpasses it entirely. The kilns burn hottest at Mohenjo-daro, a compact settlement roughly 130 kilometers south of Mohenjo-daro in Sindh, excavated by Ernest Mackay between 1935 and 1936. This is no ordinary town. It is a workshop city, a place where entire neighborhoods organize themselves around the transformation of raw materials into finished goods. The debris of production lies everywhere. Fragments of unfinished beads, broken drill bits, slag from copper smelting, discarded shells scored with cut-in marks. Mohenjo-daro exists to make things. Among the most remarkable products are stoneware bangles, fired at temperatures exceeding 1100 degrees Celsius in specially constructed kilns capable of sustained, controlled heat. This technology is unique to the Harappan world. No other Bronze Age civilization achieves it. The resulting bangles possess a glassy, vitrified surface, dark gray or black, smooth enough to slide over skin without catching. The precision required to maintain kiln temperatures at such extremes, using only wood or charcoal fuel, speaks to generations of accumulated pyrotechnical knowledge passed from master to apprentice. Carnelian bead production demands equal patience. The finest beads, some reaching 13 centimeters in length, require weeks of careful drilling using earnestite-tipped bow drills, the hardest stone available for cutting tools. Rough carnelian blanks are first heated to deepen their red-orange color, then shaped by chipping and grinding before the slow drilling begins. A single long barrel bead may take days of continuous work, the drill rotating back and forth, while fine abrasive powder and water cool the contact point. The finished beads, polished to a warm translucence, travel as far as the royal tombs of Ur in Mesopotamia, where they appear among the most prized possessions of the dead. Shell working represents another major industry. Turbinella pirum conch shells, harvested from the Gujarat coast, arrive at inland workshops where craftspeople cut them into bangles, ladles, and inlay pieces using bronze saws and chert blades. The workshop floors at Mohenjo-daro and at Nagashwa near the coast accumulate thick layers of shell dust and discarded columella cores, the waste products of an industry operating at near-industrial scale. Faience manufacture adds color to this world of earth and fire. Artisans grind quartz sand and mix it with alkali flux and copper oxide colorants, shaping the resulting paste into beads, small vessels, and animal figurines before firing them to produce a bright turquoise or blue-green glaze. The chemistry involved, though empirical rather than theoretical, demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of how heat transforms mineral compounds. Copper arrives from the mines at Khetri in Rajasthan and from Oman across the Arabian Sea. Smelted and alloyed with tin to produce bronze, It becomes axes, chisels, fishhooks, razors, and the small flat blades that serve as everyday cutting tools. The bronze dancing girl of Mohenjo-daro, cast by the lost wax method, stands as proof that Harappan metallurgists command not only utilitarian techniques, but artistic ones of considerable refinement. What distinguishes all of this production is its integration into the larger Harappan system. Standardized weights govern the measurement of raw materials and finished goods alike. Seals stamp clay tags on bundles of trade goods. The same carnelian beads drilled at Mohenjo-daro appear at Lothal, at Harappa, at sites across the Persian Gulf. Craft production is not isolated artistry, but a coordinated economic activity linking mines, workshops, ports, and distant markets into a single functioning network sustained across centuries. That network, vast and intricate, rests upon something deceptively simple: a small cube of polished chert, warm brown or pale grey, sitting in the palm of a hand. It weighs 13 63/100ths of a gram. This single unit, replicated with astonishing precision across more than 1,500 settlements spanning the entire breadth of the Harappan world, represents one of the most remarkable achievements of Bronze Age civilization. Not a monument, not a weapon, a weight. The system follows a logic both elegant and deliberate. From the base unit, values ascend in a binary sequence: 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, before shifting to decimal multiples at higher denominations. The cubes themselves are fashioned from banded chert, agate, and occasionally jasper, their surfaces ground and polished to a smoothness that speaks of painstaking manufacture. They sit in sets, arranged by size, recovered from houses, workshops, warehouses, and marketplaces across the civilization's full geographic range. The same weight standard governs transactions at Shortugai in the mountains of northern Afghanistan, at Lothal on the Gujarat coast, at Mohenjo-daro in the Sindh heartland, and at Harappa on the banks of the Ravi. Across distances exceeding 1,500 kilometers, the system holds. Alongside the weights, balance scales of copper and bronze appear in excavation contexts associated with commercial activity. Their pans hang from delicate chains, calibrated to register the smallest discrepancies. Warehouse structures at major sites yield clay ceilings, lumps of wet clay pressed against rope bindings and stamped with carved seals, evidence that goods moved under controlled conditions, their contents verified and authenticated at points of dispatch and receipt. The same impulse toward standardization governs the most fundamental building material. Fired bricks across the mature Harappan world conform to a ratio of 1 to 2 to 4, thickness to width to length. The most common brick measures 7 by 14 by 28 centimeters. This ratio persists whether the bricks form the walls of a modest two-room dwelling in a peripheral village or line the great bath of Mohenjo-daro. The consistency implies not merely shared convention, but active coordination, a system of production governed by understood and enforced norms. Yet the authority behind this coordination remains invisible. No palace complex dominates any Harappan city. No colossal statuary glorifies a ruler. No tomb of exceptional grandeur marks the burial of a king. The seals, for all their careful carving, bear no royal names, or if they do, the undeciphered script conceals them entirely. The largest residential structures at Mohenjo-daro and Harappa suggest prosperous households, perhaps those of merchants or community leaders, but nothing approaching the scale of Mesopotamian palaces or Egyptian royal compounds of the same era. Warehouse ceilings indicate bureaucratic oversight, yet the bureaucracy itself leaves no portrait of its administrators. Some scholars propose governance by a merchant council or a collective of elite families. Others suggest a priestly authority rooted in ritual practice, pointing to the Great Bath and the fire altars at Kalibangan as evidence of ceremonial power. The truth remains elusive, locked behind the undeciphered script and the material record's stubborn silence on matters of political hierarchy. What the evidence does reveal is a society capable of maintaining uniform standards of measurement, construction, and trade regulation across an area larger than ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia combined, sustained for approximately 700 years without any visible apparatus of coercive power. The weights do not shout. They do not proclaim dominion or celebrate conquest. They sit quietly in museum cases now, small cubes of polished stone, their surfaces still smooth after 4,000 years. They testify to something perhaps more extraordinary than any king's monument, a civilization that chose order over spectacle, precision over grandeur, and maintained that choice across vast distances and deep centuries through means that remain, like so much of the Harappan world, profoundly and fascinatingly unknown. That order, so meticulously maintained through weights and bricks and drains, extends into realms far less tangible. Somewhere within the disciplined geometry of these cities lives a spiritual world, and though it left no scripture, no temple complex, no carved hymn to a named deity, its traces surface in stone and clay and fire with a quiet insistence that rewards careful attention. In 1927, excavators at Mohenjo-daro uncover a small steatite bust, barely 17 centimeters tall, depicting a bearded figure with half-closed eyes and a headband bearing a circular ornament at the center of the forehead. A trefoil pattern, 3-lobed clover shapes filled with red pigment, decorates the robe draped over the left shoulder. The face carries an expression of composed inwardness, the lips slightly pursed, the gaze directed not outward but somewhere within. Scholars name this figure the priest king, borrowing vocabulary from Mesopotamia, though no evidence confirms either priesthood or kingship. What the bust does confirm is that someone in this society held a status worth commemorating in carved stone, wearing garments of deliberate symbolic design. Seal number 420, also from Mohenjo-daro, presents an even more enigmatic figure. A person sits cross-legged on a low platform, arms extended with hands resting on the knees, wearing an elaborate horned headdress. An elephant and a tiger flank the figure on one side, a rhinoceros and a buffalo on the other, with 2 deer or antelopes beneath the platform. Some scholars see in this image a prototype of the later Hindu deity Shiva in his aspect as Pashupati, lord of animals. Others caution against projecting later religious frameworks onto a civilization separated from classical Hinduism by more than a millennium. The seal itself offers no text long enough to clarify. It simply presents a figure of evident ritual significance, seated among wild creatures in a posture suggesting meditation or authority over the natural world. Terracotta figurines of women appear across dozens of Harappan sites. Many wear elaborate headdresses, heavy necklaces, and wide girdles. Some bear traces of smoke staining, suggesting they stood near fires or lamps. Whether these represent a mother goddess, fertility symbols, votive offerings, or something entirely outside modern categories, remains genuinely uncertain. At Kalibangan in Rajasthan, the southern half of the citadel mound contains a row of raised mud brick platforms, each bearing a fire pit lined with clay and filled with ash, charred animal bone, and terracotta cakes. These fire altars, dating to the mature Harappan period, stand in dedicated enclosures separated from domestic space, arranged with evident care. Their presence suggests organized ritual involving fire, though the specific beliefs animating these ceremonies remain inaccessible. The Great Bath at Mohenjo-daro, already remarkable as engineering, also carries unmistakable ritual overtones. Its careful waterproofing, its surrounding colonnades, its placement atop the citadel mound, all suggest that immersion in water held significance beyond hygiene. Ritual bathing persists as a central practice in South Asian religious life thousands of years later, and while direct continuity cannot be proven, the resonance is striking. No monumental temple has been conclusively identified at any Harappan site. No frieze depicts worship of a clearly defined pantheon. No burial contains offerings suggesting belief in a richly imagined afterlife. The sacred world of the Harappans appears woven into daily practice rather than housed in separate grand structures, embedded in household figurines, neighborhood fire altars, communal bathing, and the carved seals that circulated through every level of urban life. This absence of monumental religious architecture in a civilization fully capable of monumental construction is itself a profound statement. Whatever the Harappans believed, they expressed it not through towering shrines, but through intimate, repeated, carefully maintained acts whose meaning they carried in memory and practice rather than in stone proclamation, leaving behind only the beautiful, silent objects that once gave those beliefs material form. Those beautiful, silent objects include one that has captivated the modern world, perhaps more than any other artifact from antiquity. She stands barely 10.5 centimeters tall, a slender bronze figure of a young woman cast sometime between 2,500 and 1,900 years before the Common Era in the workshops of Mohenjo-daro. Her left hand rests on her hip. Her right arm hangs long, weighted with a cascade of bangles from shoulder to wrist. Her head tilts slightly, her weight shifts onto one leg, and her entire posture radiates an ease, a self-possession so striking that when Ernest Mackay unearthed her in 1926, he recognized immediately that this was no crude votive offering, but a work of genuine artistic ambition. She was made by the lost wax method, a technique requiring the sculptor to first model the figure in wax over a clay core, then encase it in clay, heat the mold until the wax melted away, and pour molten bronze into the void left behind. The precision of her limbs, the naturalism of her stance, the individuality of her expression all testify to a sculptural tradition of considerable maturity. She resides now in the National Museum of India in New Delhi, still radiating that same quiet confidence across 4,000 years. She is not alone. A small limestone sculpture of a bearded man, sometimes called the Priest King, though no evidence confirms either title, displays an entirely different aesthetic. Formal, frontal, eyes half closed in what appears to be meditative composure, his robe carved with a trefoil pattern once filled with red pigment. Where the dancing girl is movement and informality, This figure is stillness and ceremony. Together they suggest a civilization comfortable with a wide range of artistic expression, from the spontaneous to the hieratic. Beyond these singular masterpieces, Harappan artisans produced thousands of smaller works that reveal the texture of daily imagination. Terracotta figurines of humped bulls, water buffalo, dogs, and birds fill excavation troves across hundreds of sites. Miniature terracotta carts with solid wheels and movable axles appear to be toys, their forms precisely echoing the full-sized ox carts that moved goods along trade routes. Painted pottery carries geometric motifs, intersecting circles, pipal leaves, fish, peacocks, applied with confident brushwork in black pigment over red slip. These are not random decorations, but a shared visual vocabulary repeated across vast distances, from Harappa on the Ravi to Lothal on the Gulf of Khambhat. The most iconic artistic form remains the steatite seal. Over 2,000 have been recovered, and the most common image carved upon them is the so-called unicorn bull, a powerful animal shown in profile with a single visible horn, standing before a mysterious object, sometimes interpreted as an incense burner or ritual stand. The carving is extraordinarily fine, rendered in intaglio, so that when pressed into wet clay, it produces a raised image of startling clarity. Other seals depict elephants, rhinoceroses, tigers, short-horned bulls, and composite creatures that exist nowhere in nature. Each seal typically bears a short inscription in the undeciphered script, and many show evidence of heavy use, their edges worn smooth by years of pressing into clay ceilings that secured bundles and storeroom doors. What emerges from this collective body of work is not a civilization indifferent to beauty, but one that embedded aesthetic achievement into functional objects. The weights were polished to a gleam. The drains were laid with geometric precision. The seals were carved with the care of jewelers. Even the fired bricks, uniform in their 1:2:4 ratio, possess a visual harmony born of obsessive standardization. Art in the Harappan world was not separated from life and placed on pedestals in sacred precincts. It moved through streets in the form of painted pots, travelled trade routes as carved seals, adorned bodies as shell and faience bangles, and amused children as wheeled terracotta animals. This integration of craft and beauty into the ordinary rhythms of existence may be the most distinctive artistic statement the Indus cities ever made, a declaration that order itself, carried into every object and surface, was the highest form of expression a civilization could achieve. But that order, so deeply woven into every brick and bead and drain, depended on something no amount of human ingenuity could control. It depended on water, and sometime around 2,000 years before the Common Era, the water began to fail. The evidence lies buried in lake sediments and ocean cores extracted thousands of kilometers from the Indus floodplain. Paleoclimate studies drawing on oxygen isotope records from stalagmites in Oman and sediment analyses from the Arabian Sea reveal a pattern of weakening monsoons that began gradually, perhaps centuries before its effects became catastrophic. The Indian summer monsoon, that great engine of moisture sweeping northward from the ocean, shifted. Rainfall diminished. The rivers that had sustained 5 centuries of urban prosperity began to shrink. The Ghaggar-Hakra system suffered most. This network of channels flowing through what is now Rajasthan and Cholistan had once supported hundreds of Harappan settlements along its banks. Satellite imagery and geological fieldwork confirmed that major tributaries feeding this system, likely including glacial-fed rivers from the Himalayas, had already been captured or diverted by tectonic activity long before the mature Harappan period. What remained was increasingly monsoon-dependent. As the rains weakened, the Ghaggar Hakra dwindled from a perennial river into a seasonal stream, then into a ghost channel marked only by pale traces in the desert sand. Settlements along its course faced a slow strangulation. Fields that had yielded wheat and barley for generations now cracked under relentless sun, their soils turning white with salt drawn upward by evaporation from a falling water table. Mohenjo-daro faced a different but related catastrophe. Situated on the Indus floodplain in Sindh, the city shows evidence of repeated, devastating floods. Thick layers of silt separate occupation levels in excavation trenches, each layer representing an inundation that buried streets and ground floors under meters of alluvial mud. Geological research suggests tectonic uplift downstream may have periodically dammed the Indus, creating temporary lakes that, when breached, sent walls of water across the plain. The city was rebuilt again and again, each reconstruction slightly less careful than the last. Bricks salvaged and reused, walls thinner, alignments less precise. The dual assault was merciless. In the east, too little water. In Sindh, too much, arriving in violent surges rather than the predictable seasonal floods that agriculture required. Salinization spread across irrigated fields as drainage patterns shifted. Crop yields fell. The surplus that had fed potters and bead makers and seal carvers and the vast administrative apparatus of standardized weights contracted. Neighborhoods on the edges of Mohenjo-daro show signs of abandonment. Houses once maintained with care stand open to the elements, their drains clogged, their wells silted. At Dolavira, the elaborate reservoir system that had captured every drop of seasonal rainfall began to serve a shrinking population. The great signboard with its 10 Indus script characters still faced the ceremonial gateway, but the city behind it was contracting inward, its outer walls enclosing increasingly empty ground. This was not a single catastrophic event. No earthquake swallowed cities whole, no tsunami erased the coast. The decline was slow, generational, almost imperceptible to those living through it. A field that produced less than the year before. A well that required deeper digging. A trade caravan that arrived later, or not at all, because the river crossing had shifted. The magnificent system of order, those weights, those bricks, those drains, had been designed for a world of reliable water. That world was ending, and no amount of standardization could hold back the drying of a river or the salting of the earth. The civilization that had mastered water now found itself at the mercy of its absence. And so the absence did its work. By 1900, before the Common Era, the great cities of the Indus were not destroyed. They were slowly, quietly abandoned. The unraveling happened not with the drama of conquest, but with the exhaustion of a system that could no longer sustain itself. Streets that once carried thousands of footsteps each day grew silent. Workshops that had blazed with kiln fire for centuries cooled and filled with wind-blown dust. The precision that had defined this civilization, its weights, its script, its immaculate drains, began to dissolve, not all at once, but in a long, uneven retreat from complexity. At Mohenjo-daro, the final occupation layers tell a story of compression rather than collapse. Families crowded into spaces never designed for such density, subdividing once spacious courtyard houses into cramped warrens. Walls were patched with bricks scavenged from abandoned structures nearby. The great drains, without the civic coordination to maintain them, clogged and overflowed. Kilns were built in former living rooms. The city's famous order fractured into improvisation, its residents clinging to a place whose infrastructure could no longer support them. Eventually, even this diminished occupation ceased. The wind took over. At Harappa, the transformation left a different and haunting signature. In the area archaeologists designate Cemetery H, a new burial tradition emerged around 1900 before the Common Era, persisting for centuries. The dead were no longer interred whole, as in the earlier Cemetery R37 tradition. Instead, bones were collected after exposure or initial burial, then placed inside large painted urns. These vessels carry imagery unlike anything from the mature Harappan period. Peacocks with elaborate tail plumage, stars arranged in clusters, plants, and figures that some scholars interpret as depicting the journey of the soul. The pottery itself is coarser, the forms less standardized. Something fundamental had shifted in how these communities understood death, identity, and the cosmos. At Mohenjo-daro, the once thriving craft center where artisans had drilled carnelian beads and fired stoneware bangles, a different cultural assemblage appeared. The Juka phase, named after a nearby site, brought new pottery styles and seal forms, small, circular, with geometric designs replacing the elegant animal motifs of the mature period. The Indus script vanished from use. The standardized cubic chert weights, that quiet foundation of economic order, fell out of circulation. Trade with Mesopotamia, already diminished, effectively ceased. No more ships of Meluha docked at the quays of Ur. The population did not vanish. It dispersed. Archaeological evidence traces movement eastward into the Ganga-Yamuna Doab, where small settlements appeared bearing echoes of Harappan ceramic traditions alongside new local forms. Others moved southward into Gujarat, where sites like Rangpur and Rojdi show latte Harappan occupation continuing with simplified versions of earlier material culture. These were not refugees fleeing in panic, but communities gradually relocating over generations, following water, seeking viable agricultural land as the old heartland dried. The cities themselves became quarries. Bricks fired to precise ratios centuries earlier were pried from walls and carried away for reuse in humbler constructions. The great platforms and ramparts of Harappa were mined so thoroughly that when the Lahore-Multan Railway was constructed in the 1850s, engineers used Harappan bricks as ballast for over 100 miles of track. 4,000-year-old infrastructure repurposed without any understanding of its origin. What remained was silence and silt. The Indus flooded and receded, depositing layer upon layer of alluvium over Mohenjo-daro's lower levels. Sand drifted across Dholavira's reservoirs. The great signboard with its 10 mysterious characters lay buried beneath the desert floor of Kutch. An entire civilization, one that had sustained hundreds of thousands of people across 1,500 settlements for 7 centuries, slipped beneath the surface of the earth and out of human memory. No later tradition preserved its name. No epic recounted its achievements. The cities became mounds. The mounds became landmarks for passing herders who had no knowledge of what lay beneath their feet. Yet beneath those anonymous mounds something persisted. Not the cities themselves, not the script or the standardized weights, but quieter things, habits of hand and eye, techniques passed from mother to daughter, knowledge carried in muscle memory rather than written record. The civilization had ended. Its people had not vanished. Scattered across the landscapes of Balochistan, Sindh, Gujarat, and the upper Ganga-Yamuna Doab, small communities continued to live in ways that carried faint but unmistakable echoes of what had come before. These were not urban populations. They were villagers, pastoralists, seasonal farmers occupying modest settlements of mud brick and reed, their lives organized around cattle, goats, and rain-fed agriculture. The grand civic infrastructure was gone. The covered drains, the geometric street grids, the massive granaries, none of these survived the transition. What survived was craft. At Perak, a small settlement in the Kachi plain of Balochistan, the same broad valley where Mehrgarh had inaugurated South Asian farming 5,000 years earlier, occupation began around 1800 before the Common Era and continued for 1,000 years. The people of Perak worked with iron, rode horses, and cultivated rice and sorghum alongside the older staples of wheat and barley. Their pottery was painted but no longer in the disciplined geometric patterns of the mature Harappan tradition. Instead, new motifs appeared: horses, camels, figures that reflected a changing world. Yet their terracotta figurines, their mud brick construction methods, and their basic settlement organization carried forward threads from the older civilization, transformed but recognizable. Further east, along the fertile plains of the Ganga and Yamuna rivers, a different material culture was taking shape. Painted greyware, fine, wheel-turned pottery with geometric designs in black over a grey surface, appeared around 1200 before the Common Era and spread across the upper Gangetic Plain. These communities were smaller, more dispersed, and organized around rice and iron rather than wheat and bronze. They inhabited a landscape the Harappans had barely touched, yet certain craft traditions persisted in these new contexts. Faience manufacture, the art of creating glazed ornaments from ground quartz paste, continued in settlements across Rajasthan and Gujarat. Shell working, the cutting and polishing of marine conch into bangles, remained a living craft along the coasts, its techniques virtually unchanged from those practiced in the workshops of Mohenjo-daro and Chanhu-daro centuries earlier. This was the period when the earliest hymns of the Rigveda were being composed in archaic Sanskrit by communities in the Punjab and the northwestern frontier. These hymns describe a pastoral, semi-nomadic world of cattle herders, fire rituals, and river crossings, a world seemingly distant from the planned cities of the Indus. Yet the overlap between late Harappan material culture and early Vedic literary culture remains one of the most intensely debated questions in South Asian archaeology. Some scholars see continuity, others see replacement, most see a complex mosaic of interaction, absorption, and transformation that defies simple narrative. What is clear from the material record is that the transition was neither sudden nor total. At sites across Gujarat, small communities continued to produce distinctive Harappan-style pottery well into the second millennium before the Common Era. In the cemetery at Harappa itself, the painted burial urns of the cemetery H culture gave way gradually to new forms and new customs. The old world did not end on a single day. It faded, season by season, generation by generation, its knowledge thinning like a river spreading across a widening delta, still flowing, still carrying sediment, but no longer a single powerful current. By 1300 before the Common Era, the last identifiable traces of Harappan material culture had dissolved into the broader currents of South Asian life. The cities lay silent beneath their earthen shrouds. The script had ceased to be written. The standardized weights no longer circulated. But in village kilns and coastal workshops, in the shapes of bangles and the composition of glazes, the hands of craftspeople continued to repeat gestures first learned in the great cities of the Indus, carrying forward an inheritance they themselves could no longer name. For more than 2,000 years, the cities slept. Silt and sand buried the fired brick walls. Seasonal floods deposited fresh layers of alluvium over streets that had once carried the footsteps of tens of thousands. The mounds rose gently above the plains of Sindh and Punjab, covered in scrub grass and wild thorn, indistinguishable from natural hills. Local inhabitants quarried bricks from the ruins for railway ballast and village construction, unknowing that they were dismantling one of humanity's oldest urban civilizations. The first recorded notice came in 1826, when Charles Masson, a British deserter travelling under an assumed name through Punjab, observed the crumbling remains of a vast brick mound near the village of Harappa. He described it as a ruined castle, attributing it vaguely to the campaigns of Alexander. The observation was published and then largely forgotten. In 1872 and 73, Alexander Cunningham, the first Director General of the Archaeological Survey of India, visited Harappa and collected a strange steatite seal bearing an unfamiliar animal and unknown script characters. He could not place it within any known civilization. The seal was catalogued and set aside. Nearly half a century passed before the breakthrough. In 1921, Dayaram Sani began systematic excavations at Harappa, cutting into the mounds and revealing layer upon layer of sophisticated brickwork, pottery, and artifacts of startling refinement. That same year, 400 miles to the south, Rakhal Das Banerjee identified ancient structures emerging from a Buddhist-era stupa mound at a site called Mohenjo-daro in Sindh. The two discoveries, made independently and almost simultaneously, revealed something extraordinary. Not isolated ruins, but evidence of a coordinated urban civilization of immense scale and antiquity. John Marshall, then Director General of the Archaeological Survey, recognized the significance. On September 20th, 1924, he published an announcement in the Illustrated London News declaring the discovery of a previously unknown civilization contemporary with ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia. The world took notice. Excavations expanded rapidly through the 1920s and 30s. Ernest Mackay uncovered the bronze dancing girl and the craft workshops of Mohenjo-daro. The Great Bath emerged from the earth at Mohenjo-daro, its bitumen-sealed floor still intact after 4 millennia. In 1947, Mortimer Wheeler brought rigorous stratigraphic methods to Harappa, establishing precise chronological sequences through careful layer-by-layer excavation. His work professionalized the archaeology of the Indus, though some of his interpretations, including his theory of a violent Aryan invasion, would later be challenged and largely abandoned. After the partition of the subcontinent, a new generation of scholars expanded the map. S.R. Rao excavated Lothal in Gujarat beginning in 1955, revealing the tidal dockyard and maritime trade connections. B.B. Lal investigated Kalibangan in Rajasthan, uncovering the ancient ploughed field and fire altars. R.S. Bisht spent decades at Dholavira, exposing its extraordinary water management system and the enigmatic signboard. From 1986 onward, Jonathan Mark Kanoya and his collaborators at Harappa introduced modern scientific techniques, radiocarbon dating, chemical analysis of materials, microscopic study of craft production, transforming understanding of the civilization's technology, economy, and social organization. Each season of excavation refined the picture, pushing origins deeper into the past and revealing connections more complex than previously imagined. By the close of the 20th century, more than 1,500 Harappan sites had been identified across a territory stretching from Balochistan to western Uttar Pradesh, from the Makran coast to the foothills of the Himalayas. Fewer than 10% had been excavated. The script remained undeciphered. The nature of Harappan governance remained debated, but the civilization itself had been restored to its rightful place, not as a footnote to Mesopotamia or Egypt, but as a parallel achievement, an independent flowering of human ingenuity whose full story was only beginning to be understood. And yet the story does not end with excavation trenches and museum catalogues. It continues in the living world, in traditions so old their practitioners rarely pause to consider how deep the roots run. In the workshops of Saurashtra and coastal Gujarat, artisans still cut conch shells into bangles using techniques that mirror those practiced at Nageshwar and Balakot more than 4,000 years ago. The slow rotation of the cutting tool, the careful selection of the turbinella pirum shell, the finishing and polishing, these gestures carry an unbroken memory encoded not in text, but in muscle and material. In Bengal, shell bangle workshops follow patterns of production that echo Harappan specialization, each craftsperson responsible for a single stage in a chain of manufacture whose logic was established in the Bronze Age. Water management, too, speaks across the millennia. The stepwells of Gujarat and Rajasthan, descending in geometric precision to reach the water table, recall Dholavira's 16 reservoirs and its cascading system designed to capture every drop of monsoon rain in an arid landscape. When the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization inscribed Dholavira as a World Heritage Site in 2021, it recognized not merely ancient ruins, but a philosophy of resource management that remains urgently relevant. The white stone walls of Kadir Island still stand against the salt flats of the Rann of Kutch, testimony to engineers who understood aridity not as an obstacle, but as a problem to be solved with precision. The weight system offers another thread. The Harappan standard unit of approximately 13.5 grams, multiplied and divided in a binary decimal sequence, established a framework of commercial trust across more than 1.5 million square kilometers. Some scholars trace echoes of this system in later South Asian mercantile traditions, a quiet inheritance passed from marketplace to marketplace across generations that never knew the name Harappa. Religious iconography presents more speculative but compelling continuities. The cross-legged figure on seal number 420, surrounded by animals, bears resemblance to later depictions of Shiva as Pashupati, Lord of Creatures. Sacred trees, ritual bathing, reverence for bovine figures. These motifs persist in South Asian spiritual life, though direct lineage remains unproven and honestly debated among scholars. The script endures as the civilization's most tantalizing silence. Over 4,000 inscribed objects survive. Approximately 400 to 600 distinct signs have been catalogued. The average inscription runs to just 5 characters, the longest to 26. Without a bilingual text, a Rosetta Stone equivalent, decipherment remains elusive. Every few years, a new claim of breakthrough emerges, yet none has achieved scholarly consensus. The signs on those small steatite seals continue to guard their meaning with extraordinary patience. In 2019, a landmark DNA study led by Vasant Shinde, drawing on ancient genetic material from Rakhigarhi, revealed that the Harappan population had minimal steppe ancestry, confirming that this civilization arose from indigenous South Asian roots rather than migration from the West. The finding reshaped long-standing debates and underscored what the archaeology had always suggested, that the Indus Valley Civilization was an original achievement, born of local genius and millennia of accumulated knowledge. More than 1,500 sites have been identified. Fewer than 10% have been excavated. Beneath the alluvial plains of Sindh and Punjab, beneath the fields of Haryana and the salt marshes of Kutch, entire cities remain unexcavated, their stories locked in earth and silence. Each monsoon season shifts the soil. Each new survey reveals another mound, another scatter of fired brick in the ancient ratio, another fragment of a world that built order from mud and water and human cooperation on a scale the Bronze Age world had never seen. The civilization that left no king's name, no conquest narrative, no monument to individual glory, endures precisely because of what it valued: cleanliness, precision, craft, trade, and collective effort. It speaks not through boasts carved in stone, but through drains that still run straight, bricks that still hold true, and beads so finely drilled they humble modern jewelers. It is a civilization that still speaks quietly to anyone willing to listen. Thank you for joining this journey through one of humanity's most extraordinary and mysterious civilizations. If these stories have moved or inspired curiosity, consider subscribing so that future explorations into the ancient world find their way to you as well.